We hope you have enjoyed day 2 of the first ever Virtual Innovation Summit. The next few hours of special programming are brought to you by our sponsor, Smart Technologies. Partnering with us for 3 years, SMART has provided great opportunities for our student teams to address challenges in education where they are the primary consumer. That is pretty cool. Please welcome now Jeff Lowe, Executive Vice President, Chief Marketing Officer, and Chief Human Resources Officer, operating the Smart Cosmic Chat, evolving and transforming the future of work and education.
Thank you so much, McKenna, and hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Lowe, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer, as McKenna mentioned, at Smart Technologies. And I'm coming to you from my home office in Calgary, Canada. That's where our headquarters are. And just thrilled on behalf of everybody at Smart. We have 500 employees worldwide. And this is one of our most exciting things that we do, and it's something that we're most proud of, is being associated with this amazing initiative. It's our 3rd year sponsoring this category. Personally, it's my 3rd year being involved, and it's something that I look forward to for months ahead of time. And of course, we're in a different environment this year, but making that work just the best that we can. When I think of the Conrad Challenge and when I think of the amazing work that you guys are doing, 2 words really come to mind. The first is inspired. I'm always just so incredibly inspired by your thinking and your initiative and how you partner together and the empowerment that you have to make a difference in the world. The other word that comes to mind is confidence. I always leave these sessions feeling confident for our future because you guys are in charge. And just the amazing things that you do, it just gives me a huge amount of confidence for the future. So with that said, what we wanted to do today is make this as interactive as possible. It's really your session. We have a fantastic panel that is joining us. And once I introduce them, we're going to be turning over to you to answer questions of what's on your mind. So let me start by introducing the panel that you're going to have a chance to interact with today. We've got 3 amazing people that are so deep and so knowledgeable that I know you're going to have a lot of great questions for. So the first person I would like to bring up on our virtual stage here is Matt Wallace. So Matt is a global education consultant with Smart Technologies. He's one of my colleagues at Smart. Basically, what Matt does, I'll let him introduce himself, but he works with educators, teachers, students in all sorts of different environments, basically helping them to get the most out of technology to help their teaching and learning. And he is just a wealth of knowledge of what does it really take when it comes to this category that we're all in today. What does it actually take to drive outcomes with technology? So Matt, why don't you tell the team a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm actually based in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I've been a lifelong educator straight out of college 24 years ago now, which is amazing to think that time has passed. I have worked as an administrator. I've been a classroom teacher. I actually worked in the higher ed sphere for a while in textbooks and also as a technology strategist before joining SMART 4.5 years ago, which has been an exciting time for me to be here with SMART and to help guide them going forward and really get those insights from students and teachers to help make those changes. So glad to be here.
Thanks, Matt. Our next panelist is an incredibly impressive lady, Marina Watanabe. And Marina is a Harvard fellow, and she's also a PhD candidate at Harvard in biological science. She's doing some amazing work right now in areas such as breast cancer. And I've had the pleasure to spend some time with Marina and meet her, and she's just got an incredible amount of energy and passion for making a difference in the world. Marina, welcome to the panel, and could you please introduce yourself further?
Thank you for that, Jeff. Hi, my name is Marina Watanabe. As Jeff said, I am a PhD candidate at Harvard, where I study cancer biology. I am also a Harvard Education Innovation Fellow, where we advise various student startup teams, student startups such as yourselves, at Harvard and MIT that are working on education innovation. And I've worked in various classrooms where I've helped with underserved students who are underrepresented in the sciences. And it's really a great pleasure to be here today and hear from all of you and where you think that education is going, because at the end of the day, you are all students, so you know what you need best.
Awesome. Thank you, Marina. And last but not least, we have Stephen Hepler with us. Stephen's joining from Wales in the UK. And Stephen is a global expert, maybe the global expert on the subject of learning spaces, amongst other things. But when you think of where does learning take place, what's the ideal environment? Inside the class, outside the class, what's the optimal environment for learning? There is nobody better than Stephen Hepler to talk about that subject. Stephen and I have had the pleasure of doing some amazing sessions together on 3 or 4 continents, from in Australia, in Spain, in the United Kingdom, and he is just a wealth of knowledge, anything to do with learning spaces. So, Stephen, we're thrilled to have you on the panel as well.
No, it's good to be here, and welcome everybody. I live right on the east coast of England, right over on the opposite side of Wales, really, and I'm a professor in Spain, so buenos dias. And I do learning, as Jeff says, I do learning for the British Olympic team, for a few good soccer teams. You can guess them. I'm a professor in Madrid, and I build schools and universities all over the world, in poor countries and wealthy countries. And the one thing that excites me most about learning is I've been a professor for 30 years, so these are kind of wrinkles. But I always get surprised by just how good students can be. When you're given the opportunity to do the best they possibly can, they just blow my socks off every single time. So I'm loving every minute of this, because as we come out of the COVID thing, looking at what learning is going to look like the next decade is about as exciting as it gets. So yeah, good to be here. Looking forward to your questions. And it's evening here, by the way, over you.
Right. Thank you. All right, so we have an amazing panel. So now it's time to turn it over to you, the participants, for what questions you might have. We'll seed a couple of questions along the way to get things moving, but feel free, please, to pop anything at all into the chat window on Hopin. We really want this to be your session and have this as interactive as possible. But let me start by talking about maybe what's the most obvious pressing question is, here we are in this pandemic with COVID-19, and some of you may be returning to school. Some of you might not know what that looks like at all right now. All of us have been disrupted in terms of teaching and learning right now. So the first question that we have is, what feels different to you right now as a student? What is better or what is worse than quote unquote normal school? So as you ponder that, and please start to populate the chat window, maybe while people are filling in some of the questions, I'll ask Stephen to comment. Like, Stephen, what do you think about that question? What are you seeing right now based on your work?
It's been really, really interesting because I think schools in the first instance tried to build a sort of subset of face-to-face schooling but online. It was 8 o'clock, we've got a lesson on this, at 10 o'clock, we've got a lesson on that, and lots of recorded content. But actually, I've been doing online learning for 30 years, more than 30 years. And some of the things we've learned about that are coming home to roost with the COVID crisis. For example, we've noticed that children are really enjoying depth. They're not just doing something, stopping doing something else. My little granddaughter lives with me. You can see the space rocket up here in the roof of the house. And she's become, at 6 years old, she's become obsessed by space. Nancy would be proud of her. And she's watching the satellites go past at night, building chemical rockets, frightening the life out of the neighbours. And she's able to pursue that as far and as fast as she wants. So I think depth has been a real surprise, and I think maybe we won't be able to put that genie back in the bottle. Some of the students watching this, teachers will have said, "You're not supposed to know this yet, but I'll tell you next year when we get to that part of the curriculum." Well, for them, they want to know it right now, And I think one of the things we've seen in the last month or so is they don't hold back. And the second thing, I think, has been the mixture of ages. I live with 2 grandchildren here, a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. The 4-year-old is desperate to be the 6-year-old, and the 6-year-old is having to get her skates on to stay ahead of the 4-year-old. And we've seen that, I think, in mixed-age teaching online for a long time. One of the joys, Jeff, last year when we were doing this face-to-face with students was watching the students all watching each other so carefully and learning from them, and the artificiality, really, of having people in a room born between 2 Septembers or 2 Januaries down in the Southern Hemisphere. That all starts to ring a bit hollow, I think. And I think people watching learning in families going on has been interesting to see that mixed aging, because the mixed age is now including parents as well, because mum was just at the table next door doing a bit of work online, and suddenly we're all in the same space. And one of the things we've been looking at is how you can make that space work, because I think a lot of folk watching this will know that students struggle with homework completion. When they get to home, start doing their work, they can't more. The focus goes. Well, we've been measuring the physical environment. We're doing a little sort of research project, measuring temperature and CO2 and humidity and pretty much all the things that affect the cognitive processes in your brain, movement. And one of the big surprises has been that home learning environments are really pretty. They're too dark, too hot. There's a lot wrong with them. The light levels are way too dark. I mean, looking at Jeff's room there, it's super bright. If I turn on, I can turn on a lot of light in this room, the lux levels jump up. I feel myself perking up, And suddenly, I think parents and children together are realizing they can build a better learning space where they want to work and they want to finish their tasks. When they go back into the classroom, they're not going to want to go back in a room that's, chock full of CO2 and the room that's too dark. I mean, one of the things we do in the research, we get plants into the classroom. Plants are all named, and every kid has their own plant, BYOP. And the impact of 30 plants in a room in sucking down the CO2, increasing the oxygen. It really has to be seen to be believed. We've seen things like ADHD drop by nearly 3/4 just by changing the physical environment. So, I think people, most of all at home, are thinking, this time of year, it's kind of nice to be outside. And, outside, of course, you've got brilliant. I mean, outside now is kind of early evening, but we've still got about 14,000 lux outside. Most classrooms run at about maybe 100, 150 lux. So there's so much of that good light that's gone before you sit down to work. So I think somehow in the last month we've discovered let's get a bit of depth into our learning. Let's work with each other, different ages, different cultures, connected around the world. Let's get the conditions right. And boy, when you get those conditions right, we're cooking with gas. So I think you might say kind of tentatively, Jeff, this is kind of, we're just about at the death of education here, but we're pretty much at the dawn of learning, and I think a lot of students were looking at this are going to go back in the schools and do some pretty good learning. And that's a different place for everyone.
Thank you for that, Stephen. But before we leave this question, and maybe I'll throw this out to any of the three of you. I'm looking at the chat window. Because the question, what's been good and what's been bad about this new environment. From a good perspective, hey, we have some more free time. One of our participants says. One of our other participants, Olivia, says that's true, but the lack of conversation and debate takes the enjoyment out of my classes. So is that what you guys are seeing as well? I'll throw that one open.
I think definitely in a classroom or even in a work setting, having those little casual conversations really helps you get to know your classmates as people or your coworkers as people and relate to them on a deeper level. And when you're only there from, say, 9 to 10 o'clock for a class and it's very regimented, you don't get that deeper interaction with them and you don't get to really know who these people are. And you feel quite isolated. So I definitely relate to that and knowing that it's not as fun to be in class or at work when you're only there for class and work. You don't get to have those deeper connections.
Yeah. So let me throw another question out there. It's related, and again, it's a big question. But for everybody who's listening in, what do you think is the biggest challenge being faced in education around the world right now? And we can talk. Well, like, what's the biggest issue? And then how might we solve that? That's probably a 2 week long conference to discuss that. But what's the biggest problem? So we just talked about a couple of things in terms of lack of conversation and debate. Let me provide a perspective on that myself from spending a ton of time with educators and students and teachers all over the world, as well as being married to a teacher myself. I would use the word connection as being one of, if not the biggest problems. It's really hard to make a very authentic connection between a teacher and a student in these times. So yes, there's tools and yes, there's technology, but just that in-person time, and sometimes it's not so much about the curriculum or the subject matter, it's really more the personal stuff of that bond that a teacher has with a student. That is just so richly missed by the teacher and by the student that is really hard to replicate with technology. And so I've talked to so many teachers that say, I really miss my kids. And even though they're with me in a digital place, I miss those connections. So I'm having to try to make up for that by maybe going to see them at a distance on a night or a weekend, or compensating for it in other ways. But it's that human element that is in and around the actual curriculum that I think is a huge challenge right now. What does everybody else think?
Jeff, can I just jump in on that human element? Because I think the kind of elephant in the room here is new technology. Computers are staggeringly smart. I mean, the first ones we put into classrooms, we had to make ourselves, to literally get out a saw and cut wood and solder the components. But today's computers with neural networks, tomorrow's with quantum processing and so on, are incredible. So it's worth taking a moment to say, what are humans good at and what are computers good at? And that seems to me this is the crisis for the students watching, because computers are really good at rule-based systems. They obey the rules. They're really good at remembering. They're really good at batch processing. They're really good at following instructions, and they're really good at repetition. And a lot of our schools, I think, have been filled with rules and remembering and batch processing and repetition. Kids, people are really good at ingenuity. We've seen that in states over the years with the Conrad Challenge. They're good at problem solving. They're really good at collaborating. I don't think they necessarily need to be too much close to each other to collaborate. They can do it in a lot of different ways. And most of all, perhaps, they're good at playfulness and adventure and deep understanding. And I think what we've seen, particularly in the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, have been students in the school environments incredibly playful and ingenious and creative with the way that they're using the environment. I was talking to a group of students the other day, and one of them it turned out was just a gif of herself kind of nodding wisely, and she'd learned pretty quick that she didn't really need to be in the Zoom lesson. She could just put a gif up as a background of herself nodding, and she could go off and have a cup of coffee. I mean, straight away within 10 days, she'd found a way to hack the system, to subvert it. And I think that ingenuity is what we're going to need. The coronavirus crisis is closely followed by the climate crisis, will be followed by the water shortage crisis, can be followed by, most of the rest of our lives is going to be unexpected problems. And we don't solve the unexpected problems with rule-based systems and remembering. We solve them with ingenuity, with deep understanding, playfulness and adventure. So it seems to me the big challenge for education is how do we stop doing the things that we built computers to do better than us, and how do we focus on doing the things that we need to be good at? And the Conrad Challenge is a really good example of one of those things that allows students to be good at the things they're going to need to be good at when computers are super smart. So I think there's a challenge really.
There's been Shani in the chat window put forward the issue of accessibility or inaccessibility, as the case may be, and then several of others have topped up on that same topic. That's certainly something that we're hearing as well. I'll read the comment from Shani. Thanks for the comment. I think the inaccessibility of technology to do work and study from home is a big challenge right now all over the world. So what if that infrastructure is just not there? People don't have equal access to the tools and the technology. That's for a wide variety of reasons. That's a major issue. Matt, you're nodding your head. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yes, I was going to say, I think that has been an underlying thing that people have, this crisis has brought to the forefront of everyone's minds, is to realize that this digital divide, this lack of equity when it comes to access to, internet or the kind of distance communication has been there, and it needs to be addressed. And it needs to be addressed by governments and municipalities to make sure that we're giving that equal access to learning opportunities. So during this crisis, to see that some students are still getting packets sent home while other students are in a fully embedded, digital classroom, that doesn't equate to the same types of learning. And so we're seeing that all over, which further goes into what I was going to add was schools are a safe haven emotionally for students. And, making sure also that they have that access to still communicate with teachers or friends is also, I think, critical for their social and emotional stability during this time.
Yeah. There's a question.
Someone who has predominantly worked with, I'm sorry, as someone who has predominantly worked with underserved students, I definitely see a huge equity gap in what's going on right now. Education inequity is huge. people have noted it's not just about inaccessibility, it's about just societal inequality that we have. This is especially prevalent I'm in the US, so I've seen this a lot, where schools in, say, Mississippi are doing so much more poorly. Their funding is just not there relative to, say, a school in California. And these are definitely issues that COVID-19 has really highlighted. I've had students who, they don't have laptops at home. They can't just jump on the Wi-Fi and do the homework assignments. So moving forward, how are we going to address this? Does the government need to really step in? Do teachers need to step in? I'm running to you guys for ideas as the participants. What do you think about this?
Well, Jeff, I'd just chip into that because, it's what we do with technology is to build, a version of the expensive tools we had before. Then 2.2 billion children in the world, about half of them are not going to have that opportunity. On the other hand, if you look around the world at Project Balloon, putting balloons all over Kenya with great Wi-Fi access. You look at the SkyTrain satellites going past in the sky at the moment, which is going to give global outreach to rural areas in a way we never had before. Here's a thing, I've been working down in Yemen, Pakistan, all over really, and kids have got nothing. No buildings, no electricity. But here's a simple thing. This is, this is a till receipt printer, and you can just hack it to turn it into a decent printer. So, I think if we're ingenious with the way we use technology, we'll hopefully got a much better chance of taking the learning from the last month to school. There's 25 million kids in Pakistan with no building, no teachers, and no education. And the chances of us building a school, finding 1 million teachers to teach in it are zero. But giving them the opportunity to study and learn from the environment around them, to work with people around the world, is eminently achievable. And I think if we just focus on getting kids into learning rather than getting kids into education, we've got a real chance of cracking that problem. My first teaching was in desperately poor East London, and I had the time of my life, and I had a class of kids who'd been told they'd passed nothing. And the 5 terms on, they all walked away with a certificate. There's nothing wrong with the kids anywhere. We're just going to give them a fair crack of the whip. But we won't do that by giving them what worked for wealthy countries. We've got to give them something better and different and new. And we can. We absolutely can.
Yeah. There's a great question from Joshua. What can students do at a local level to address the equity issue?
I've found personally that volunteering with organizations that will accept students as, say, if you're all in high school, so accept going into volunteer roles with your local organizations that help to give back to the community. Maybe there's tutoring services that you can offer to others who might not have access to the same education that you do. Or maybe you can volunteer at some kind of community center that has those kinds of opportunities for you. I know personally I was doing things like that, and it seems, or going to things, not even teaching them at the time, but those were very beneficial to me. And I think there will definitely be those who could utilize that help.
I would say, even trying to have some of an event where you're collecting, all devices, whether it's cell phones, whether it's hotspots, but events like that, reach out to your friends, see what all devices they have. So a lot of times, young kids, we move from one to the next device and we throw them away, or we don't know where they go. Reach out, see if you can get those, because that's again part of it. Access to the internet right now. We see schools busting in hotspots into low-income areas to get access is great. So can you find your parents have had old hotspots that you can donate or come up with?
Yeah, I think that a bit of symmetry really helps. It's history says that a lot of the NGOs and a lot of huge number of well-meaning people have sort of tried to solve equity by saying, well, here's what you haven't got that we can give it to you. Look, here's a robotics kit, away you go. But actually, people even in the most dire circumstances are smart, and having a conversation with them about how can I learn from you is a great way to help them learn, and it builds their self-esteem. And I was doing some work with some Indigenous folk in Australia, and I've never seen the night sky the same since I'd spent time with them. What they see is a bit of the sky that's got no stars in it, and their story is about the serpent eating all the stars and so on. I'd never noticed a bit of sky with no stars, because the kind of Western view was always, oh, well, look at the stars. We've got constellation names for them. They're jolly interesting. So, learning from each other is a great way of leveling up the ship, because then we realise we've all got something to contribute. I think just at the moment, we need all hands on deck with ingenuity and ideas. That means we need to value each other's ideas. So, even people who've got a pretty tough roll of the dice, they've got something they can teach you, and learn from them is a great way to help them, for sure.
I want to piggyback on what Stephen said right now, and that human element and that connection element. And one thing that you can do is speak up if you see anything. So, for example, Harvard just put out a website that was about how to learn remotely more effectively. And they just assumed that all of their students had access to reliable internet, that they had safe home environments, that they would have computers at home regardless of where they were. And that is a huge assumption to make. So it was on the students to reach out to Harvard administration and say, you are making a lot of huge assumptions about the state that some of these students are in. You need to be aware of the fact that not everyone is equal, that there are some inequalities here, that you can't just assume everyone has the same amount of privilege. And so if you see a teacher, or if you see someone in your community also making these assumptions and not being fair, be brave and speak up about it. And I know that can be scary sometimes, especially if it's someone in a position of authority, but you are in a position to see the inequity that's happening around you and the societal effect that this has. So speak up and say something, and fight for what you believe in.
It's great advice. Great advice from all of you on the equity issue. I want to touch on, there's a couple of questions here that are touching on a really interesting question. So I'm going to combine them. So Simon asked, will virtual environments play a role in education in the future? So for example, are we going to see avatars interacting with each other? Is this going to lead to some unintended consequences? And then along with that, Anku asked, what are some of the most creative techniques you've seen educators use to make virtual or remote classes more engaging? So avatars or otherwise, what's working when it comes to remote engagement? What are you guys seeing?
Well, I can jump right in on that. I mean, not the least because I'm also a professor at Bournemouth University, and we had 72 students working on Avatar the movie. So they had a lot of fun with all that. But I think we've seen historically, a lot of times when people have thought, oh, here's a representation of Second Life, for example, and it's never quite that simple. I think it's people need the cues and clues of identity to be real. The complicated thing here is that sort of me, we, see. I'm me. I need to know who I am. I need to have that implicit referencing of myself, my work getting better. We, I need to think about who I'm collaborating with, and how I trust them, and how I invest that trust, how it's rewarded, and see, how I show my stuff to an audience, and the audience see what I've done and celebrate it with me. And it may be that for the seeker, you want a bit of anonymity because, you've been learning poetry and you've just written a love poem. You really don't want your mum to see it, but you want other people to see it, But so there are different levels of self according to what you're doing in all this. And I think that just makes it all pretty complicated. I think one of the mistakes probably we've made in education is to make the students be just that one person, not a me, we, see person. I think that's a complicated thing, But the other half of the question, what was the other half of the question, Jeff?
What sort of things are working in terms of making remote or distance learning effective and engaging?
Really simple answer to that. The thing that works every single time, listening to the students. we're doing a project in Spain where we're asking several hundred students to create their own lessons for online learning. And you just know that none of those are going to be standing in front of a video, delivering a bit of content, setting some worksheets, So every single time, if you want to see original thinking, ask the students how it can be better. That never fails. Never fails.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that by saying that it's student choice. One of the local districts here, instead of continuing down the path of handing out whether it's new worksheets or using their textbooks, just to go, they really went into, learning where they gave students multiple choices to create projects. They did more collaboration amongst different content areas. And it wasn't widespread. It was just one school that I knew of that was doing it. And I thought that was really great to see that they took the risk during this time to try something innovative. Something that research says is what students need, is to give them choice in their learning. Let them come up with the topic or the project. So that was really good. And, the teachers left some of the situations learning new technology tools to use, which then changed what they were doing or maybe what they're going to do next year.
Yeah, what Matt's talking about is actually this question drives a lot of what we actually do at Smart Technologies as a technology provider. Is when you think of it, I think most of you would agree. Most education that's shifting, right? But needs to shift more. So a lot of teaching is done from a PDF file or a PowerPoint presentation or a document. How do you make that engaging? That's a huge focus, right? Like, how can you turn that into something you can get student feedback on, or put that content into the hands of the students so they can manipulate it on their own pace, in their own way, turn it into a game. So that's actually the major driving point behind, if you said, Jeff, what's new at Smart? You guys are the Smart Board company. That's actually where most of our focus is on making any content engaging over any distance, whether it's in the class or on any device. But that's what we're seeing is when to Matt's point, when the students have some control and some agency in their own content and their own learning, that's what tends to be working from our perspective.
Yeah, I'll give you a measure of the power of that agency. We were doing a project across Spain where we'd asked different kids in different schools to make over their learning environment significantly. We gave them different budgets. Some had effectively an open budget, others had only 500 euros, and one had no money at all. And that was in Barcelona, and we gave them a heap of cardboard, and we said, just make the learning environment of the future that you're imagining, and work out how you would work in it and what you would do. And of course, they were full of ideas, and they had Jeff, to cover your ears at this point, because they built a cardboard smartboard, because they had no money for the real thing, and they had cardboard iPads, and they had all sorts of cute things. But the surprise was the learning got better, even with the cardboard. And what was happening was they were role-playing better learning. They were role-playing learning in the future. My granddaughters run around role-playing, princesses and pirates and things all the time, But here with kids role-playing better learning. And, we learned so much from just watching what they thought was better learning. But even with cardboard technology, everything got better. Engagement, attendance, performance, academic output, everything got better. And they were just playing at better learning. But that's the power of student agency. And trusting.
So let me ask again a really provocative question, and if the participants are willing to share on a personal level. What are you guys thinking about right now? What are you nervous or excited about for your future and the next step in your education and career? So what are some of those things that you're thinking of? What your excitements, your fears in this kind of new reality that we're living in? And maybe to stimulate the conversation, I'll ask Marina, maybe you could comment on this a little bit, because as a student yourself, in a hands-on discipline. What's changing for you? What are you excited or nervous or fearful about because of the days that we're living in?
Yeah, so as Jeff mentioned, I am myself also a student. I'm a PhD student, and I'm studying cancer biology. So currently, the norm has shifted where my school is not going back in the fall. Everything is going to be virtual. And that greatly changes the dynamic of what's going on in the classroom and how we do learning. And some of you have already noted in the chat box that, again, it's not as interactive. You don't feel that connection. It's not as engaging. And I don't know about you guys, but I personally have a lot of issues with time management and self-control sometimes. So knowing, oh, I need to be in class at 9. Oh, but I have so much free time. Oh, but I need to focus. Oh, but I need to do this. It's very hard to juggle all of those things. And so I know for the future, it's being more disciplined with myself is definitely a concern I have. Also, again, just the equity issues come up because I have classmates who might not be as fortunate as I, or there are classmates who are more privileged than I who might be getting an advantage. How are we going to address that and make this a more level playing field for everyone? Also, the future is just really uncertain. I'm supposed to be in a laboratory doing breast cancer research right now, and I'm sure, just like you guys, I've been at home for most of this time. So my research is not going forward. My graduation is quite far away. Will I have a job in the future? Unclear. So everything is kind of up in the air. And I think a lot of you are probably thinking that as well. The future is quite uncertain. It's a little scary.
Stephen, I wonder, any thoughts on that? What are you guys seeing and with the students you're working with?
Yeah, it's actually pretty exciting time, I think, for me. I'm working. I mean, I've never been busier than I've been in the last month. The world's gone learning mad. The phone keeps ringing. Everybody from New Zealand to Saudi Arabia saying, "What does the future of learning look like?" So everybody's asking that question. That makes it feel, I think, like a bit of a fork in the road, which is exciting. I think the biggest change for me has been the collective nature of all this and the way that people are collaborating with others, and geographical proximity seems to have gone out of the window. And see, we've always had that. I mean, we were doing online learning in the 80s, and that was happening then. But, for kids, they're pretty comfy in TikTok, doing their dances, and they're doing that all around the world, and yet in their classes, they're not doing it all around the world. And suddenly, I think we've seen, kids swapping thoughts with other bits of their family, with people that, they would normally see physically, grandparents or whatever, and suddenly it's all happening pretty effectively online, where they've got the opportunity and where they've got the connectivity, of course. And I think that's really me. I just chucked a question in there that's directly pertinent, really, which is what are the key skills you need in this going forward? And for me, the really big one is understanding the world of longitude and the world of latitude. I think if you're collaborating with other people on your line of latitude, I mean, right now I'm in England, but folk in Johannesburg are having supper about the same time. So that'll be a good place to compare our day. On the other hand, you guys are over in Canada or North America. There are people watching this in Asia. So in the world of latitude, I do my project, I pass it on. It goes to Marina, she passes it on. It goes halfway around the world, comes back through Japan and India back to me. And 6 teams have worked on my project overnight. In the world of longitude, I've got a whole range of different cultures that I can talk to about something I'm doing right now. And I think kids getting their heads around time zones really, really, really important. When my little 4 and 6-year-old come running in, the first thing I always ask whoever's on the screen is, "Where are you?" Because they want to know what time of day it is. And there are clues. They might be drinking a coffee or having a glass of wine is a bit of a clue. But by and large, getting your head around the world, globally connected world, is really, really important. It's a bit bizarre, I think, but education is still a national thing. We don't have national airlines. We don't have national anything very much anymore, maybe armies. But apart from that, it's pretty Qantas airline used to be the Queensland and Northern Territories Air Service. It isn't anymore, it's a global carrier. So, education is going global. And I think the skill to cope with that is all about time zones above all else. Importantly. Thank you.
We're seeing a fair bit on this question in terms of the on the topic of mental health, and as people are being isolated and not spending time with their friends, uncertain about their future, don't know about the job situation, some of the things that both Marina and Stephen were talking about. Mental illness, I think, is becoming a real mainstream issue. What is the schools or the education policy's role and responsibility when it comes to student mental health? I think is a really interesting question.
I know that, again, I'll speak locally first and then maybe nationally, but that schools are really trying to figure out how they can meet the needs, of those students. They've tried to talk about their guidance counselors and some of the counseling social workers to get more virtual sessions, setting up times that they can meet, with their students. I think we have 5 kids, and ranging from a 16-year-old down to 2.5, and the older kids are so focused on that social aspect, but they also, you can tell that it is wearing on them mentally, being isolated, not having that ability as a teenager to, talk to like-minded people, to go, not be around your parents. And as much as I hate saying that, you can just tell they don't have that outlet, that release. And no matter what we think, that begins to build up, in them. So, I'm addressing this from the standpoint of kids who were just naturally all right. I can only imagine what it is for those who actually have, other conditions, of what that is, and how it is impacting them.
I think definitely if you are feeling isolated and alone and just very anxious about this, reach out to someone and say something about that. I know, again, it can be really scary to put yourself out there, but reach out to a teacher, reach out to a guidance counselor that your school has, because it is a very upsetting time that we are in right now. And a lot of us don't know how to handle these emotions on our own. So get help where you can. And someone in the chat box said they're trying to take it a day at a time. And I definitely understand that, because we don't know where we're going to be a week from now. So taking it a day at a time and just making sure that you're taking care of yourself and put yourself first. It's very important.
I'm going to back that up. From a personal standpoint, my daughter actually had a very early on tough time, and we ended up virtually sending her to a counselor because of what you just said. She couldn't handle not being around her friends, and she was going through a tough time anyway. So not to be able to have that, and we were fortunate, to be able to reach out to that was doing virtual sessions. But I want to emphasize what Frida just said. Talk to people, reach out. Don't let it roll up in you.
Yeah, I think the rhetoric can be unhelpful as well. And a lot of the politicians talk about we must get kids back to school because look at what they're losing. And it would have been nicer if they were saying we need to get them back because we need to know what they've found out that they can teach us in the time they've been away. Let's bring them back because what they've gained, rather than let's get them back because of what they've lost. And I think it's a much more positive view of all that. And that's the truth of it. We need to hear what's been effective. We need to hear what's been playful, what's been exciting, what's been challenging. We need to hear from them about what's worked. And saying you must come back quick because you've lost the chance to do what you were doing for the last 100 years seems to me to miss the point. We need to hear from them. And that's a very positive attitude. But on the other hand, if you're locked away in a tiny flat with no outdoor space and one parent and the money is really tight, anybody's going to be having a tough time at that point, for sure.
And reach out to each other. Do check-ins with your friends. See if someone's doing okay. Unfortunately, there is still a lot of stigma around speaking about if you're having mental health issues or if you're having problems. Some people are scared to say something. So let others know that you think it's okay. Say like, hey, I noticed, you haven't been coming to class, or I know you've been really quiet. Is everything okay? And just acknowledging the fact that there are problems out there and that you think it's okay if someone is going through those, because we really need to address the stigma about mental health awareness.
There was a recent report I was reading about the increase in cyberbullying that has gone up during this time, because it's hard to, from a parent standpoint, being home, about tracking what's being said on, their students' social media and what's going on, and trying to bring more awareness to parents to also reach out to their kids, talk to their kids, find out, what is going on, as well. Because they're not in that school setting where they are there, in the school setting, they're the police, they're really, big efforts. So to think that those types of environments stop when you're now home, is not right.
And keep a sense of perspective helps a little too. We haven't really heard the stories very loudly in our press. We in the University of Madrid, we've taken on a lot of refugee students and brought them in from Syria, Afghanistan, and so on. And when you sit down with them and hear their stories of one of the lads was the only one to get out of his university class, and somebody dropped a bomb through the roof and he was slamming out over the limbs of his classmates, and the people all around the world having really tough times in all sorts of ways. That solidarity, I think, is exactly as Marina said, talking to each other about how they cope with all that. There's a lot worse things to cope with than isolation.
Be gentle with yourselves and each other.
Yes,
great way of putting it. Mia asked a great question a few minutes ago, piggybacking on this conversation. What are the most vital new skills that you foresee students will need to learn in the future because of all this?
I'm going to start off by saying one of the first ones that I think gets overlooked is communication and effective communication skills. One of the biggest things that we're hearing about maybe coming back in the fall is with teachers having to wear masks and us wearing masks, how much you lose in terms of understanding others by their facial expressions. So, really, listening to people. You're going to have to, especially with some of that, those expressions not being to be seen, but to focus on communication skills. How do you communicate not only verbally, but how do you also write in a digital format, effectively to communicate your point?
And I think piggybacking on that, and another point in regard to communication is being more upfront about things. So say if there is a problem and you can't maybe complete an assignment, don't just ghost your teacher, let them know. Communicating ahead of time, or if you foresee some problems coming up in the semester, say that, because you're not going to be able to see your teacher every day from 9 o'clock to whatever time anymore. So communicating that via email or through chat, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and being good at this, because one of the things that's come out of this economically is huge numbers of people are now going to be working from home and not going to the office every day, not commuting, not sitting in cars, and commercial buildings coming up on the market empty all the time right now because people are never going to go back into them. So, the time you spend talking to each other and talking to your friends and listening to conversations, time well spent, because that will be the working world for a significant part of many of you. I remember I was going on a ferry in little tiny river, sort of developing world, and the ferry driver took 2 cars across the river every day. He just applied for a job as a crew on a super yacht in the Mediterranean, and his dream was to get rid of the damn ferry and go off to sail in the Med. And he said he'd failed the interview because he'd been interviewed with the camera pointing at his chest, and he just did it really badly. And he said if only when he'd been at school he'd had a chance to practice and working and learning online, he would have got that job. And so I would say that to everybody, to take time to be good at this for sure, because you're going to need it.
Yeah, there's something in the education industry around the future and what's required that is predates the pandemic, called the 4 C's. And it's the importance of what students need to be successful in the future being paramount, of the 4 C's. And those C's are, we've already touched on them, communication, as Stephen was just talking about, collaboration, working well with others, critical thinking. These are the things that Stephen was saying before. Machines are really good at some things, but not at others. And the last one is creativity. So these are the 4 C's. And that's not because of the pandemic they're important. I would say they're more important now, more than ever, because of the situation we find ourselves in. So we just have a few minutes left, everyone. This has been a really rich dialogue on some very, very important subjects. We've talked about everything from the need for accessibility, the critical importance of mental health, how to make remote learning engaging, what are some of the critical skills that are going to be required in the future. So we've covered a lot of territory on some very important topics. What I'd like to do now is just turn it over to each one of our panel members just to kind of summarize what's the main point, or what would be the one thing you would like the participants to leave this forum with, if you had to put a finer point on it. So Stephen, why don't we start with you? What would be your one piece of advice or point to our participants and our incredible students that are participating today?
I think if I look back on all the projects I've been involved with, and some of them are huge, when the Guinness Book of Records, goodness knows what, the projects that were, in the end, brave enough to stretch the students in them to the best of their capabilities, in every case terrified me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, scared, thinking, oh, Stephen, what have you done? You've just gone too far this time, mate. I mean, what were you thinking? And I'd been a cold sweat night after night. Those projects were just about brave enough to go forward. So I think the bit of advice I'd give to all the students, and they don't need it because goodness knows that they're here already. So, be not just brave, but be recklessly brave. Just throw yourself into this. And if you're not scared, you're not terrified by what you're thinking you might be able to do, you ain't been brave enough. So go off and fight yourself. My top tip. Yeah.
I like that. Be recklessly brave. Matt, over to you. What advice would you give?
I would give that to embrace and accept failure as a positive, not as a negative, and that it's okay to make mistakes. That mistakes or failure lead to, I like to say, 4 things. One, it leads to redirection, right? It gives you the answers of where to go next and what to do. It provides you with opportunity. Failure is not the end; it is the beginning, right, of a new opportunity and a new venture. They are chances for growth because you get those results that you haven't had. And kind of what Stephen said, the last would be courage. Have the courage to fail and to know that failure is just one step closer to success. And I use Winston Churchill's quote, probably the most in any talk that I have, which is, success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue, right, that counts the most. So always have that courage and willingness to fail.
Well said, Matt. Thank you. And so, Marina, the last word is going to go to you. What advice would you give from your perspective?
I think this really builds off of what Stephen and Matt were saying, but what I've found to be really important and that I'd like to share with you all is to be flexible. A lot of the times things aren't going to go the way that you expected. Sometimes, even if you were brave, it doesn't work out and mistakes were made and failures happen. If that happens, be flexible about it, be creative, think about ways to keep going despite the fact that something really unfortunate has taken place, and figure out how to pivot from that. I mean, you all are here now in a virtual setting when we were originally going to be in Florida. So clearly you are flexible. Conrad, instead of just giving up and saying, okay, I guess we're not doing it this year, they want virtual. So there is a lot of the times going to be a way to make something happen. despite it maybe not being in the same shape or form that you initially planned for it. So being open to those changes, and maybe they're going to be really big changes, but being open to that is really important.
Awesome. So to summarize, team, the three points of advice from our panel in closing today are: number one, be recklessly brave. Number two, don't be afraid to fail, accept failure. And number three, be flexible. And I think that puts a great wrapper on our session. Thank you very much to our panelists, Stephen, Marina, and Matt. I think you guys gave some great advice. And I'll bring McKenna back in and turn the stage over to her. But just in closing, again, on behalf of everybody at SMART, we're just thrilled to be part of this amazing event year after year. We admire you guys. Keep doing what you're doing. The world needs your guys' greatness now more than ever. And we'll look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you all so much. Wow, what an inspirational presentation. Thank you again to Smart Technologies and their team for all of your support for the Conrad Foundation. To all our participants, please make sure you take time to visit the Smart